Hello and welcome to video 2 in our Java programming tutorial series for beginners. So you can see we are right where we left off with printing two lines, hello world and hello world 2 to the screen. And in this video, I'm going to be going over variables and data types, the absolute fundamentals we have to understand before we can move on to anything more complex. So let's talk about what a variable is. Now, a variable, just like in mathematics, is something that holds a value. Now, in our case, that doesn't have to be just a number. It could be a string, it could be a Boolean, an integer. Like, we're going to talk about the different values, and those are what are known as data types or objects. So let's start by just creating a variable. To create a variable, we need to first figure out what type our variable is going to be. In this case, I'm going to start with an integer, and then we're going to go through all the different types and talk about what the difference is. So to start, we're going to type int, declaring that this variable that we're about to type out is going to be an integer. We're then going to give a variable name. Now, the variable name should contain typically just letters and underscores. Now, I believe you can use numbers as long as it's at the end, but in our purpose, we're not going to do that. When we create a variable name, you have to make sure you do not use any spaces, and you don't use any special characters as well. So I'll go through a few examples of valid variable names and invalid variable names. So a valid variable name, for example, could be hello. That's valid because we don't have any spaces, we don't have any special characters, and there's no numbers in it, okay? Now an invalid variable name would be something like hello name, okay? This whole thing as our variable name is invalid because it contains a space. Now if I try to put like a percent sign like this, or I try to put like an asterisk, that is not a valid variable name. So don't use any special characters. You can end with an underscore, you could start with an underscore if you want to, but we're not going to be doing that in this case. Typically when you create a variable, if you want to make a name be like 2 words, the way you do it is you type like hello, and then you would do a capital and then the next word, or you would do an underscore representing a space and then the next word. Okay, so that's enough about valid variable names. It's not super important right now. So I'm going to create my first variable, int hello world, and that's going to be equal to, by just putting an equal sign, whatever integer I want. So in this case, I'm going to say 5, and then remember in Java, whenever we end a line, so this is just saying my integer hello world is equal to 5, we need to terminate with a semicolon. So there we go, and we see we get int. Our variable name is now highlighted in yellow, and there's no issues. So if I highlight, let's just see what it says. This is never used. Okay, that's fine. So we've officially created a variable. The variable name hello world now points to the integer 5. So to prove this to you, I am simply going to print out the value of hello world like this. Okay, so I'm going to say system.out, oh, that's a comma, isn't it? System.out.println, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, so hello underscore world, that's our variable name, and that variable holds 5. So when we print this, we should be printing 5. The way this works in the computer, right, is it says, okay, hello world, let's see where hello world is. It's up here. All right, hello world is equal to 5, so we print that. Okay, so there we go, and we get 5 printed down here in the bottom of the screen. Now I want to show you something quickly, and this is just going to go, this is a really important fundamental thing that a lot of people don't talk about in programming tutorials. And it's kind of like order of operations or execution. So I am going to now put my variable underneath my system.out.println. Okay, so I'm first going to print hello world, and then I'm going to set hello world equal to 5. Hopefully you guys have realized what the issue might be here. If not, I'll talk about it really quickly. And the problem is that I am trying to print the value of hello world before I've declared it. Because in programming, the way things work is, unless you otherwise specify, we're going to be reading from top to bottom and left to right, just the way you'd read a book, right? So we first read this line, system.out.println, hello world, and then we create hello world. So here, we don't know what hello world is. So if we try to do this, you can see it warns me there's an error. I'm going to say, okay, you know what, there's an error, let's proceed anyways. And you can see that down here, we get a bunch of red text. And it says, hello world cannot be resolved to a variable because we haven't yet declared that variable. So we have to make sure whenever we're referencing or using variables that we first have them declared somewhere above our like the line that we're using them in. Okay, so there we go, we've created a variable hello world, we print that to the screen. Now let's create a few different variables and talk about what these types are. So in case I didn't really specify, int stands for integer, and that pretty much stands for any number that does not have a decimal point. So as soon as I put a decimal like this, like 5.0, this actually becomes a new data type, and that data type is called a float. Now, float stands for floating decimal point, which means any number that has a floating decimal point. So I'm going to say float, let's see, num2 is going to be my variable name, is equal to, and in this case, I'm going to say 5.0. What's the issue here? Add cast from double to, okay, 1 second. We're just gonna say double. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake there. We're just gonna type double here as the name, okay? Not float. Don't worry about float right now. We'll talk about that later. So anyways, we have double num2 equals 5.0. Now double is exactly what I was explaining before. Anything that has a floating decimal point. So even though this is still the exact same value as this in terms of mathematics, because it has a floating decimal point in our computer, it is referenced as a double, okay? Now, there's some other data types as well that we're going to talk about. So we have int, we have double, we also have something called Boolean. Now, Boolean is true or false, and these are going to be really important in the next few videos that we talk about. So Boolean, I'm just going to say b as my variable name, is going to be equal to, and in this case, I'm going to say true, and again, make sure I'm putting my semicolon. Now, there's only two values that a Boolean data type can have. That is true or false. Now, why these are important is because based on the value of a Boolean type, we're going to be doing things later in our program. Like if b was equal to true, we're going to print something, otherwise we won't print something. So that's really important. So another data type that we have is known as char. Now, char is any character, okay? So this is a little bit different from a string that I talked about in the last video, but I'm going to talk about string as well. So I'm going to say char c is equal to, and whenever we create a character, there's two ways that we can do it. We can do it with Unicode, which you probably don't know what that is, or we could do it with single quotation marks. So by just simply hitting the single quotation marks, we can put one letter in the single quotation marks, and that is a character, because that's what char stands for, a character. So like something on your keyboard in quotation marks. Now a character could be, for example, 9 in quotation marks. So that's still a valid character because it's in quotation marks. It's different than the number like 9 if I were to type that up here, okay? So any letter or character that goes in quotation marks is a char. Now we have to be careful because chars can only be one character. If I try to do like 03, you can see that we're getting red text and Java's yelling at us and it's saying, no, that's not allowed, because we can only have one thing. All right, now I just want to show you, I want to go over again really quickly what the main difference is between this 9 and this 9. Up here, we've declared we're going to have an integer named hello world, and it's set equal to 9, okay? That's what it is. This is a character, and since it's in quotation marks, this is not the same thing as 9. The way, like, the data types really do matter in this sense, okay? So I'm just going to change this back to, like, H or something for now, okay? Char C equals H. So that is extremely important. Now, string. This is another data type. It's a different kind of data type, which we'll talk about in a second. But to make a string, we do string, I believe with a capital, we'll see. And then we give a name. So for our variable, in this case, I'm just going to say str is equal to, and then this time for string, we use double quotation marks, okay? And I'm just going to say Tim in here. So chars, single quotation marks, and strings are double quotation marks, okay? And strings can contain anything in them. So I could have like 6, 7, 3 underscore star. That's a completely valid string. We can put any characters as long as they're within inside of these quotation marks, okay? Same thing with the character. If you put a 9 in a string, this is different than a 9 like this, okay? So these are our main data types. There are a few other ones, but I'm not going to go into them right now because they I don't know, they're a bit more complex than we can handle right now. So pretty much though, you might notice that this string is highlighted as a different color than these. You can see int is orange, double is orange, boolean's orange, char is orange. Why is string blue? Now the reason it's blue is because it's a different type of data type. These 4 data types that I talked about up top here are known as primitive, and wow, I really just did that. I'm used to typing Python. Primitive data types, okay? And what that stands for is not changeable, okay? And we're gonna talk more about primitive data types and not primitive data types later on, but just know that these ones that I talked about here are known as primitive in Java, and this one is not primitive, okay? So anyways, let's just see now, printing out like some of these data types, like what we get when we print them to the screen, right? So if I print, for example, C to the screen, well, you should guess what we're going to get. We get H because that's C. If we print str, we get 9, and so on. Now, last thing I want to show you with variables is that we can actually make variables equal to other variables, and we can add variables, and we can subtract variables. And that's what we're going to be doing a lot in the next video, but I want to just quickly introduce you. So for example, I want to create a new integer, okay? I'm going to say new integer, and I'm going to call it, let's just call it Tim, why not? Now, I want this integer to be equal to 9, okay? But I don't want to type 9 out. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to type hello underscore world, like this. Now what we've essentially done is we've taken the value from hello world and we've assigned it to Tim. So now if we were to print Tim to the screen, we get the value 9. Now if I want to print hello world to the screen, you can see that we are still getting the value of 9. So now Tim points to hello world, which points to 9, right? So Tim is equal to 9 and hello world is equal to 9. And we can do that, and we can add variables together, we can subtract variables, we can do all kinds of cool things, and that's really the point of variables, right? So we just have to make sure when we're doing this, for example, that we don't do something like this. String Tim equals hello world. You can see here now it says cannot convert from int to string because the data type string is obviously not the same as 9. So we can't do that until we learn about something called typecasting, which will be in a future video. So anyways, that has been it for this video. I hope you now understand what variables are, how they work, and how we can create them in Java. In the next video, we're going to be talking about operations, so adding variables, subtracting, dividing, doing stuff like that. And then we'll be moving on to some more advanced stuff. As always, if you guys liked the video, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I will see you again in the next one.